to the next topic I wanted to talk to you about, which is that merchant of record. Suddenly you've got, you deploy an iasset.com instance, and you've got a myriad of transactions you need to manage. It's automated, wonderful, tick. And then the next horror story comes in automation, and that is monetizing it.
Yeah.
Collecting the money. Now, usually that happens through a channel, but the channel can't do it as well because of the amount of transactions. They're not set up for it. So they need help with merchant of record, multiple currencies, multiple locations, multiple companies, multiple countries. And that's the vendor dilemma that you solve. You completely solve. And that's why we fell in love with you guys when we met, because you solve a huge problem for us, let alone our customers. Tell me about the whole story, the whole merchant, and the reason why it's important to me is because when channels, including the vendor, distributor, and reseller, get, I'm going to use the word complacent, and complacent is that we've got that covered, and we know that they don't. A lot of analysts tell us, Doug, that no, what happens in those situations is alternate channels get built. All right, but let me say that I don't feel bad about talking about that, alternative channels, because there's always been internal channels, alternative channels. Remember when they were just resellers, all right? And now you've got service providers.
Yeah.
Now the biggest part of the channel, the prime contractor, the biggest part of the prime contractor is the service provider, and they would just take it for granted, all right, that it's there. But one day it was like they're the enemy.
Yeah.
All right. And also a huge influencer, which is now becoming part of the channel, are the big six accounting firms who they had a discussion with organizations at a risk level. And because we're talking about digital transformation, all their customers are transforming digitally. Suddenly there's a risk discussion. Suddenly they are now the prime contractor for their technology deployments, and they're buying up technology companies. And now it's just custom and practice that you are getting deployments, digital transformation deployments from your accounting firm, effectively, who is now managing the risk of digital transformation. They love the idea of merchant of record. They love the idea of being able to partner with someone at the risk, though, of complacent channels. And that includes the vendor who think that they've got it covered, and we know that they don't. It's sensitive, right?
Yeah.
But I want to talk to you about that because it's so important right now to be able to have that after we create the possibility and the opportunity with the unsolicited proposal, which is going to them. They're monetizing it, and someone has to. Because I know you also look after the existing partner. But what happens when they don't? Big topic. Answer it the way you want. I won't be offended if you say, well, it's the dangerous one. Let's not go there. But
no,
I'll go.
Let's dive in. Let's dive into it. And if I go off topic, bring me back in. But
sure.
What I would say is you talked about, first of all, the customer is going to go where there's the highest value and the lowest friction.
Yep.
And every vendor wants their partners focused, I would assume, mostly on adopt, landing new accounts, and expansion. And most resellers probably don't want to have to deal with nuts and bolts of like a $1,500 to $5,000 renewal. That's almost friction at that point. So that's where I think with merchant of record, a lot of the value can be is basically taking away all of those burdens of having to actually collect cash, regardless of whatever geography that person is in, providing a convenient way for that customer to pay in their currency, using their language, using the payment method that they want. We find for instance, in the Netherlands, somebody might want to use Ideal. Something like 20% of B2B buyers will pay on this payment method called Ideal.
Right.
That's removing friction. And in some cases, a reseller or a distributor or a vendor may decide they don't want to provide that purchase option, but it's an option that they can employ when and where that makes sense. And so that's a lot of what we try to do. And as far as we try to be agnostic. So in most cases today, we're really working with an OEM, but we could certainly support a reseller or a distributor that, together with iasset, to provide a similar benefit with that merchant of record capability. Because you've got the quote that's generated from iasset.com, but now just one level more, remove that friction from actually letting the customer pay.
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing about our partnership. It's tried and tested, and the technology works, so you don't even notice it.
Yeah,
you don't even notice it right from end to end. But you're using best of breed,
right?
This is like someone said to me just yesterday. A colleague, a potential customer said to me, everyone tells me iasset.com is best of breed for what you do in terms of creating the opportunity by mining the installed base and telling you what you should be selling, next. And you're peerless. Why are you peerless? Well, because we've been doing it for 15 years and people are now just jumping in. This is a 15-year-old startup. And, my business partner, Scott, being who he is, and Michael Carlisle, who's the CTO, they don't even think about entering market unless you've got world-class technology. So it's always going to work. All right. And the beautiful thing about when we looked at partnering with cleverbridge and indeed collaborating on deals, the integration was seamless.
Yeah.
Built two things built for purpose, and you might as well call it one solution. And that's a lot of our teams now are going in and doing those collaborative calls and solving huge parts of our customers' problems. And the uptake is very strong and it's very encouraging. But the idea that an alternative channel can be born, I think it actually can be born inside the existing channel. It's just the channel being clever enough to say, you know what, at the very least, this is going to be a new business initiative. And I don't even have to invest in it because someone else is. I just have to use it because we both do, a success-based model, which says you only pay for a deal when it happens.
Yeah.
The cost of entry is zero. The cost of entry is zero. But my sore point, Doug, is if the existing players don't do it, someone will.
And I agree with you. And maybe if I could, there are a couple statistics that I think are pretty compelling that maybe I could share. So one of our clients, in setting up our solution, they found that it was saving sales reps about 18 hours a month per rep.
Wow.
By using this quote to cash process that we're talking about. And when you think about how scarce selling time is for sales reps, whether you're a direct sales rep or you're working on behalf of a reseller, that's a huge time savings. And what they also found is once they got a rep, so what they had reps do is they had them generate the quote sent out an e-commerce buy link that the customer could purchase from. And as a consequence, they found that 20% of renewals no longer needed manual intervention. So the sales rep could focus on higher value work. And it was so compelling that they actually pay their sales reps a higher commission to route them into this streamlined, more automated process so that they can focus on the higher value. That's one case. And right now, when I talk to leaders of customer success, most of them are focused on scale and effectiveness. And the way you do that is technology.
Yeah. So I think that's really important. You touch on something that's dear to me because when I talk to like Jack Forrester or Jack at TSAA, they both engage in a conversation with me that's something like vendors used to steer their field teams towards the new technology that's coming out that they're starting to sell.
Yeah.
And that's how they would make their channels successful, by changing commission plans and changing partner and distributor incentives, through margin or whatever, or whatever incentive it is, to steer them towards the next generation of technology. Isn't it the same to do exactly the same to steer them towards the next generation of how to sell that technology and how to secure that base, which talks to the massive conversation around partner success. I'm only going to be successful if I make my partner successful. I used to do that by giving them great technology and steering them towards it, by giving incentives to, so they could stop doing what they were doing and doing something else. The selling motion is absent, the automation process, because what we're talking about is the $1 trillion refresh opportunity they talk to in terms of the technology, because its foundation is built on the desire to digitally transform. Because I don't want to be the taxi company that lost to Uber. I don't want to be the hotel company that lost to Airbnb, et cetera, et cetera. So I need to transform. So yeah, it is technology, but how do I do that when, for the first time in history, it's at a massive scale since the invention of the internet?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think working with both of our platforms provides them that type of capability in a channel dominant scenario completely.
So what, in your mind, and we can talk about this, as we end the conversation, which has been delightful. I've just got, it's packed. So I'm going to listen to this a few times because I couldn't write down notes fast enough. So thank you very much. And I implore all our viewers to listen to this twice. Listen to Doug twice, because he just made some powerful comments that you could take into your organization to help you convince them to change the narrative and talk to strategy changes. But what for example, let's pick on vendors. What should a vendor be doing right now, as far as you're concerned, in terms of automating their install base selling motion through technology? What's step number one?
Well, I'd say step number one is make it really easy for your customer to buy when and how they want to buy. And that, for some people, it means making sure there's a quote that gets to the customer. Most customers want to be notified of, for instance, a renewal event via email. Do you provide email notifications? I know iasset.com does a great job with that. Those would be some basic ones. It depends on where the customer or where the vendor is trying to focus in the land, adopt, expand, renew process, and where the yield would be the highest. But I'd say probably job number one is make it easy for those customers to renew. That should be table stakes, and so you can focus on the adopt, expand, and maybe landing new customers.
So when we're talking to vendors, and I know that this is also something that you guys talk about as well, is every vendor almost has their own take on that. All right. So if you're a distributor or a partner or a reseller or a prime, let's just call it prime contractor to an end customer, because I'm not allowed to say reseller anymore. Or, it drives me nuts. It's the person who sells stuff to the ultimate consumer. I call them the prime contractor because I don't offend anyone. Every vendor has a different take on it, right? So the distributor then has to deal with, and the partner has to deal with, or the prime contractor has to deal with multiple platforms. And it just confuses the whole situation because they go in isolation. Number one, no technology lives in isolation. So you can't be pushing your own platform. Number two, it only matters to you. So you miss the whole ecosystem in terms of the roadmap of making that successful. So throwing it into and this is why our technologies focus on multiple vendor programs, and right down to the end with CleverBridge, multiple currencies and multiple ways of handling that transaction. All right, one platform, end to end.
And I think that is definitely a major challenge in the industry right now. I think I've heard Cisco talk about, with their Lifecycle Advantage program, they had started with 150 systems. And I think they're trying to pare that down to 1/3 of what they have, but that's still a lot. I talked with the leader of customer success that I spoke to today. They have about 200 systems their team has to use in some way. And a lot of times the data doesn't talk to each other. And that's speaking across the customer lifecycle. So I think certainly simplification, being able to move things to a fewer number of tools can be very helpful for a lot of these critical activities.
I think my friend Nick Mehta from Gainsight, when he was on ChannelTalks a little while ago, just said it well. And he said, how can you make a customer successful when you're asking him to work on 15 and 16 tools to become successful?
Yeah.
They don't even want a tool. They want to be told what to do.
Well, I'm hearing about cases right now. These would be considered almost better scenarios for a lot of legacy companies, where for them to generate a quote can take 20 to 60 minutes. That because they're having to work in 6 to 8 different systems just to generate and issue that quote.
Yeah, and especially when you're starting to think about the movement from on premises capital expenditures to all cloud and consumption. So the transaction is not once every 3 years; it's once every day.
Yeah.
Or once every 20 days or 30 days or 90 days or a year if you're lucky. How do you manage that? Not with multiple platforms that are doing that. And this is where APIs are important, and why when we found that we integrated immediately with you guys, it gave end to end, but it also allows the vendor to be part of that ecosystem of and I call it the transaction ecosystem. And you only need one, and there might be a few others that we'll end up competing with, but for now you only need one, which takes away that massive burden, because ignorant Nick didn't realize that was one of the main reasons why a lot of vendors were saying, oh, slow down. How many freaking platforms?
There would be a proliferation of another platform. Yeah. And to your point, we could together or a vendor using our platforms could handle anything from the landing a new customer to the expansion to the renewal very seamlessly.
Yeah, and one of our vendor partners said it best when they said, well, what you're doing is creating the transaction ecosystem. You only need one.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm going to write that down, and that might even be my new tattoo, because it just kind of nailed it, didn't it? Nailed it. And it's good that we're having those conversations now with vendors who are taking that leap forward and starting to understand, that whole customer success motion also includes a non-burdening of transaction management.
Yeah, and what we're finding right now is that the statistic I've most recently seen is something like 75% of customer success leaders now have renewal responsibility.
Yeah,
and they don't want this. They don't want friction added. They want to provide value, but they don't need the friction of the transaction.
Yeah. And the truth is that statistic is going to head towards 100% very quickly.
Yeah.
So they don't want it. What they actually do want is that not even an issue, because they know that the renewal gets looked after if they're doing the expand side of it. So the campaign side of what else can I sell you to make that initial transaction powerful, and which is, we've got a little saying inside iasset.com, which is, if at first you don't succeed, renew. So it's the last thing you do is renew, because you've done a whole bunch of other stuff after you've sold something, and that's a lot of transactions.
Yeah, and if I could maybe just follow on that point, if you look at the most successful SaaS companies, they have net revenue retention percentages that are roughly between 120 and 140. That's a lot of expansion.
Yeah,
that is a lot of expansion that the customer success and account management teams are driving.
Right. And that metric is a really big one. Where's that come from?
I'm citing data from OpenView Partners.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Just wanted to, always want to make sure that our viewers know that we're not just, making numbers up.
I could provide a reference for if you want to have show links or something.
We always do that in the show notes, because it's important that we maintain the integrity. We're steering people into a new direction. We want to make sure that they're covered, and that's fantastic. Doug, what else do we need to tell our viewers right now about this topic that we haven't covered yet?
I think one question I would maybe just want to pose here is, I think one of the big values is customer data and insights. And it might be interesting to talk about how iasset.com and cleverbridge maybe contribute to that single view of the customer. I know a lot of that might be an interesting aspect to bring up.
Yeah, I think it's important because, like I said, the truth is in the data, but the reporting is what justifies the investment.
Yeah.
So all our reporting is, and which integrates what we do with cleverbridge now, is all about being able to tell you exactly what's happening, but also exactly what's not happening. That's really important. The what's not happening is what drives. So the what's happening proves the investment, and it gives you wonderful reports into management and just tells you that that bit's working. But the most important are the reports that tell you what's not happening, which opportunities aren't being closed, which opportunities aren't being pursued, which opportunity. So it gives you a selling strategy. You know, you sit down and you say to your sales team, I want you to get that number next quarter. Well, and this is how you're going to do it.
And that's a really interesting point. And like, that's one of the things that's that we can do now together is when we have that transactional data, basically be able to populate that in the system of record CRM as well as iasset.com. So we'll know if somebody's actually visited the page where that quote was displayed, if they attempted to transact, if they looked at, we'll be able to provide all of that data. So a lot of, or if their payment information has expired, we can try to update that on their behalf, but we can also notify the vendor or the partner that data still needs to be updated to have a successful renewal.
Yeah, which is a really important statistic for a lot of vendors because they need to know the deal was done. How do they know the deal was done? Well, you'll tell them.
Yeah.
Because it got paid for, particularly in a subscription world where you can't, in a lot of accounting rules, you can't recognize that until it's paid for.
Yeah.
So that's just gold as a lot of organizations digitally transform, and with that comes a whole bunch of subscriptions. I mean, I know one of the largest security companies in the world, the subscription side of their business is bigger than their hardware business already.
Interesting. Yeah.
Already, and they're one of the biggest, if not the biggest. I don't know, but it depends on how everyone measures these things these days. But what happens when it's virtually all? I mean, that's a lot of transactions to make.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of money to collect. And that's a lot of proof of purchase that's necessary. If you're not using a system that allows for you to do that, your incumbent system, you're just adding unnecessary cost to your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it caused,
the beautiful thing is you've got the reports to prove it. So it's you can audit, that wonderful thing called auditing. There it is.
Yeah.
So this is maturing. I think it's taken a while for the channel, I believe, to embrace installed base selling. And if Scott was here, he would say because most organizations are measured on net new. Right, new logos, new business, new this, because kind of that's how Wall Street's built, right?
And a lot of the culture is there. Like a lot of the CEOs came out of acquisition sales, right? So
yeah. So a new invoice into an existing customer is net new because it's contested, every single one of them.
Yeah.
And the more you automate, the less contested it is because they don't want to think about it anyway. The ultimate consumer. I think it's a really good question, mate. It's a really, really good.
Well, that's one thing that we definitely encourage. Where appropriate, we recommend auto renew. And what we found is that the renewal rate, when you have an auto renew contract, typically goes up at least 10 to 20 points.
Yeah.
Just by the fact that it's recurring, you've already got the payment details. You don't need to ask the customer for payment. You've got their credit card or what have you.
Yeah, and that reminds me, and I will leave it at this, with a lot of new sales motion technologies, which is kind of what the best way I can describe what we do, or an opportunity management is another way of looking at it. A lot of early adopters want it to be their competitive advantage. Now, the technology is not your competitive advantage; it enables your competitive advantages, which is your strategy. And I always come back to it. We've got our LIP strategy, land, invest, protect, surrender. You guys dovetail right into that, perfect in every execution of that. You have to have a strategy. This just doesn't happen because you've just deployed, iasset.com and cleverbridge. No, you got to know why you're doing it, using it, and that's where you get the acceleration, and that's really important. So, Doug, I'm just conscious of time. We've gone way above the normals. Doug, thank you so much. You've been very generous, not only with your time, but your insight, which I've got just so much that I've got to get into now. You've just tripled my workload, but that's a good thing, right?
Nick, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, mate. Couldn't be more excited to be part of this ecosystem and have not only the support that we have for ChannelTalks, which is insane, but also what we have for iasset.com and of course cleverbridge with our new collaboration with them. Everybody, till next time, thank you very much. See you next time.